Susan Woodings. It was June 30th, 1974. The first birthday party at Bond's Burgers just wrapped up, and Susan Woodings, lead technician at Bunny Smiles Inc., decided to stay late to check on some irregularities she'd noticed in the animatronics during the show. Unfortunately, one of those animatronics was currently being piloted by a malicious spirit. Susan was in the backstage listening to the radio when a toolbox fell from a shelf, and when she looked up to see what knocked it over, Bond was standing there. The spirit-possessing Bond lifted her and messed her up, then stuffed her lifeless body into the Banny animatronic, hoping she'd get finished eventually. But Susan woke up in a place called Wonderland where the spirit who went by Bond tried to convince her to possess the animatronic permanently. She rejected the offer, woke up briefly inside Banny, barely alive and unable to move, wandered Wonderland again, encountered Bond a second time, and eventually died for real when her body finally gave out. At which point she had no choice but to accept the possession offer, because a spirit can't survive without a vessel. Years later, in 1977, Susan's spirit messed with an analog camera left in the K9 storage facility where Banny had been moved, getting close to the lens to tell whoever was watching, possibly Sophie Walten, possibly just the facility caretaker, that she was still there. And in 1982, she communicated through the Bunny Farm arcade machine to show Sophie a recreation of her attack, which is exactly the kind of trauma no one asked for. Susan was 35 when she died, spent decades trapped in an animatronic rabbit, and the whole thing could have been avoided if the possessed robot had just picked a method and committed to it. Job Zamperini. American World War II veteran, fluent in Morse code, devout Christian, and the unfortunate star of one of the most disturbing analog horror interviews ever recorded. August 13th, 2003, Job was watching a nature documentary called Tree of Heaven when the broadcast got hijacked by something called the Boiled One, an anomalous entity that left viewers in a state of pseudocoma where you're physically unresponsive but mentally aware of everything happening to you. Most victims couldn't provide useful information during interviews, but Job's case stood out because his grandson took a photo in the backyard showing the Boiled One standing next to a small playhouse. The family thought the house was haunted and called a priest, but Job insisted that something horrible and unholy was with him and warned that describing it might cause harm to himself or others. But Officer T. Gomez from the Ephrata branch interviewed him anyway, and the recording is exactly as bad as you'd expect. Job explained that before he lost mobility, he saw a face on the television, horribly burnt, not of Lord Christ, and insisted the creature was real and currently visible through the window during the interview. He also heard the screams of many voices and, at night before sleep, the sound of trumpets, which is a direct reference to the 7 trumpets from the Book of Revelation that signal the end of the world. The interview ends with the Boiled One's face rising outside Job's window, which means the last thing captured on tape is the creature actively stalking him. Job's entire character is a deliberate parallel to Louis Zamperini, the Olympic runner and World War II POW who confronted his captor Mutsuhiro Watanabe with faith and forgiveness, except Job's defiance is against an eldritch entity that doesn't care about redemption. He's also based on the biblical figure Job, the man who lost everything in a test from God but remained faithful, which makes the whole situation feel like a cosmic joke where the punchline is prolonged psychological torment. Job Zamperini had specifically requested his alias be used in future records instead of his real name, which remains classified, and honestly, that's the least horrifying detail in this entire entry. The Lebedev Brothers. 3 brothers, Alex, Jackson, and Oliver Lebedev, who worked as naturalist photographers in Alaska, had the misfortune of being connected to really malicious supernatural forces. Alex appeared in The Starving Five, a VHS Tales segment set in the Alaskan wilderness near Itosivik, where he faced off against a Wendigo-like entity alongside Gary Astor, Dmitry Olov, and Natasha. Jackson and Oliver were unalived on December 10, 2003, at their residence about 25 miles from Lake Oakburn. The killer was a man named Anthony Carter, who had been possessed by Marvpiers, an eldritch aquatic flutist entity that commands people to murk other people as demonstrations of power. Carter broke into the Lebedev residence and hit Jackson with a pickaxe, which left him debilitated. Oliver dragged Jackson into the dark room while being held at gunpoint, but that's where both brothers were unalived. They're weirdly aligned on the floor in a staging that felt ritualistic. Carter called the police afterward and confessed to what happened, laughing the entire time during interrogation because he was no longer in control of his own mind. But here's where it gets weird. The official report stated the bodies showed signs that they drowned, with vascular marbling, skin discoloration, bloating, and pulmonary injury indicating water inhalation. which absolutely doesn't make sense. Turns out Martha Astor, who was investigating the case, ordered the police to throw the bodies into Lake Oakburn to cover up the supernatural elements and keep people from knowing how terrible things really were in the area. So the Lebedev brothers were killed twice, once by Carter in the darkroom, and again when their bodies were dumped into the lake to sink, possibly while they were still half alive or resurrected in some form. The family had connections to the original Mavpius law. Their great-great-grandfather, Professor Fyodor Petrov Lebedev, wrote the first book of Mavpius in 1864 after meeting the Ludolf mother. Over 150 years later, 2 more Lebedevs were murked on behalf of Mavpius, and the details are too specific to be coincidence. They were photographers, they were unalived in their darkroom, and the implication is they photographed something they weren't supposed to see. So Mavpius sent his servant to eliminate them the moment he had the capability to do so. Rosemary Walten. It was May 2nd, 1974. Rosemary Walten's life collapsed when her 2 youngest children, Ed and Molly, were unalived in a car accident caused by Felix Kranken's drunk driving. This caused her to spiral into depression, but most significantly, she became extremely overprotective of her only surviving child, Sophie. Then, on June 11th, her husband, Jack Walten, disappeared without a trace, which made everything exponentially worse. Rosemary went to Bonsberger's every single day asking if anyone had seen him, and on June 30th, she was fired from Bunny Smiles Incorporated for causing employee drama, which is corporate slang for, "Chat, this girl is speedrunning unemployment and it's making the vibes rancid." So on July 19th, 1974, sometime between 2 and 3 a.m., Rosemary went back to the restaurant and somehow got inside. A voice called out to her, "I know where he is, Rosie. Follow me," and she followed it into the backstage expecting answers. Instead, she found Bon, who did some really horrible things to her and stuffed her inside the Shah animatronic. Her screams woke several Brighton locals, and when the police arrived, they had to break down the locked doors, but they found no evidence of what happened because the officers were not locked the F in. Through sheer bad luck, Sophie saw Rosemary inside the Shah animatronic a few days later, which traumatized her for life. By 1978, 4 years after her death, Rosemary's spirit had deteriorated so much that she started referring to herself in third person as Shah, having forgotten large portions of her past life and only vaguely remembering the name Sophie. In October 1982, she communicated with Sophie through the Bunny Farm arcade machine during a hide-and-seek minigame, asking, "Am I still beautiful to you, Sophie?" before playing the audio of her own screams. Later, she modified a 1978 tape to ask Sophie where she was, which is heartbreaking because Rosemary was 40 when she died and spent years trapped in an animatronic sheep asking her daughter to find her. The Harvester Victims. In 1989, a family of 4 went hiking in the Canadian woods, and 2 of them, the youngest son and the mother, became the most documented victims of a harvester attack in the entire Vita Carnis series. Harvesters are bulbous meat organisms with underground tendrils that extend up to 150 meters, equipped with 2 types of appendages: spined hunting tendrils that inject neurotoxin and anticoagulant, and absorption tendrils that sense blood and drag prey underground. The neurotoxin attacks the nervous system and causes rapid paralysis with intense burning nerve pain while the victim remains fully conscious. Meanwhile, the anticoagulant prevents blood clotting. During that fateful day, the child wandered away from the family and unfortunately entered the harvester's range. The attack was captured on audio, and it's totally not ending up on someone's playlist. What's worse is the screams continued as the harvester began processing the youngest one, which means he was alive and aware during parts of the digestion. The mother searched for him, discovered the horror, screamed, and was then attacked herself. It was pretty graphic, and everything was detailed in the species anomaly report. After both were eliminated, their bodies were digested, which were then absorbed into the main bulb and converted into usable energy. Harvesters have a 100% fatality rate once someone is envenomated, and there's no known cure, which means if you step into their range, you're cooked. Barrry Johnson. Party supervisor at Moonlight Acres who survived the Christmas Eve 1985 Wretch attack but got infected with deep root disease in the process, which turned him into a walking nightmare made of roots and malformed flesh. The Wretch attacked the Moonlight Acres Christmas party by mimicking the voice of someone named Mary, insisting her lover Jack let her inside. Barry and his co-workers refused because something was very off about the voice. When that didn't work, the Wretch broke into the building and assimilated or killed several people at the party. Only 2 survivors are confirmed, Barry Johnson and Jack Wilder Dean, but Barry's escape came with a price. He was infected with deep root disease, a condition caused by exposure to the root systems deployed by the iris. By the time we see him in Shifting Tendons, Barry has lost all resemblance to his human form except for his vaguely humanoid shape. the transformation is irreversible, and Barrry is either dead and being puppeted by the roots or alive and trapped inside a body that no longer functions like a human's. Deep root disease is a parasitic biological weapon of the iris, an extraterrestrial infection that transforms victims into nature's mockeries. Dr. Farren Brones. On October 2nd, 1994, Dr. Farren Brones, a mimic expert, was tasked to research mimics in the field, which he decided to do at the Chris and Janice household by installing equipment and taking up residence in the basement toilet. The plan was to lure a standard mimic, observe it, and hopefully capture it. But what he actually lured was an elder mimic, a larger, darker, more resilient version that forms when an adult mimic overeats. Farren encountered it on the stairs and immediately retreated to the basement toilet, where he stayed for 28 days using the rations he'd collected. He requested carcass to extract him on the 20th day, but on the 22nd day he realized they weren't coming. And on the 28th day he connected the dots. Carcass had abandoned him. Before the elder mimic officially terminated him, Farren hid the camera under the sink so Carcass wouldn't find it when they cleaned up the scene, and he wished that someone not affiliated with the organization would find the recorder and expose what they truly were. Multiple gunshot sounds are heard before his death, which means Farren fought back until the very end. But elder mimics are incredibly resilient, and a single Beretta 92 FS wasn't enough to stop it. But some of the things Brones did could have actually been avoided, because despite being labeled a mimic expert, Farren blatantly ignored established survival protocols. He cornered himself with no quick escape, didn't consider the possibility of an elder mimic, went out entirely alone, and only brought one weapon. Woodcrawler victims. The woodcrawlers are spider-like aliens from the iris that burrow under houses, attack from below the floorboards, and convert humans into fake people, which are stiff-moving puppets that repeat phrases like screams for help to lure more victims. They've been around since at least the 1930s at Moonlight Acres family camp, where visitors called them skinwalkers. The most explicit victim sequence is in Home Invasion Help, an instructional tape that's actually a guide for woodcrawlers disguised as home safety advice. The post-tutorial footage shows a camera person entering an already invaded house filled with red mycelium growths, indicators of deep root disease. They spot a woodcrawler shadow, flee, fall, and get attacked on camera. The screams are agonizing, and the footage ends with the woodcrawler pinning them down and killing them. The house victims had already been turned into fake people or consumed, yellow-eyed figures present throughout the footage. At Moonlight Acres, a Christmas party was interrupted by creatures that killed multiple campers and staff, and Barrry Johnson got infected with deep root disease during the attack. Broader assimilation happened across North America, families in homes targeted by swarms, police officers crushed in their cars by woodcrawlers attacking from underground, and hikers in wooded areas converted or killed. The process is this: burrow under the house undetected, incapacitate or kill the residents, convert them into fake people via infection, use the fake people as lures, and move to the next house. Victims often experience sudden home invasions with humanoid shapes, red growths, and the realization that their neighbors or family members have already been replaced. Fake people can stand up again unless burned, which means even after you think someone's dead, they might just be waiting for the right moment to lure you in. The broader victim scale is massive, thousands to millions in the overarching iris invasion, with woodcrawlers as key vectors for assimilation. One tally estimates over 5 billion humans affected. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe. And if there's any video idea you want me to cover, drop it in the comments. I always check them out. See you in the next one.